Okay, so we are going to start discussing this one of the early Malayalam novels called Saraswativijayam, which was published in 1892. Saraswativijayam was written by Potheri Kunyambu, who was uh, he was actually a member of the Tia community of Malabar. He was from Kannur, and this story is mostly set in Talasheri. And this was written at a time, it is the late colonial period in Kerala, when a lot of social transformations were happening. So the casteism was very, very rampant in those days, and there was a very hierarchical caste structure. You would have already read up more about, the caste system in India, and especially in Kerala during those times. But so this Kunyambu wrote during a time when the caste system was highly entrenched, but it was also a time of great changes happening because of European colonialism and the advent of European missionaries. So because missionaries were trying, Tulya has connection issue, that's okay. If she can, let her join later, otherwise she can watch the recording later. Okay, so this was also a time when there were a lot of changes in society because of European colonialism. European colonialism, we know that it had a lot of adverse effects, but at the same time, as part of colonialism, the European missionaries also started a lot of educational institutions. So it was a part of education and conversion, where equally the tasks that were taken up by European missionaries, and the people who benefited most from this early wave of education and conversion were the so-called lower caste people of society, because the upper caste people were afraid that if they converted, they would lose their caste, or if they even went to these educational institutions by Europeans, they would lose their caste privileges. But because the lower caste people had nothing to lose and everything to gain by going to these missionary education missions for education, they were able to benefit from the educational policies of the missionaries. At the same time, conversion to Christianity also offered them a way out of the problems of their own caste society. So because in the Hindu society at that time, they were completely oppressed and they had no rights whatsoever. Many of them were even treated like slaves, even though slavery, by the time Kunyambu was writing this book, slavery had been actually technically abolished by the English East India Company in around 1843. In 1843, there was a law that was passed by the East India Company called the Emancipation Act. As a result of which, it was considered illegal to keep lower caste people as slaves, because the Brahmins and other upper castes used to keep lower caste people as slaves, and it was considered to be illegal after the proclamation of this Emancipation Act of 1843 by the British. But most of the Brahmins, as we will see when we go into the story, most of the Brahmins of that time did not consider the European laws to be relevant to them. So they did not consider themselves to come under the purview of the British laws. It is only out of necessity that they would abide by any of the laws of the British. Rather, they believed not even in the laws of their own princely is the local rulers. More than everything, they believed in the Vedas, and they thought that the Vedas and the Manusmriti gave them all the laws that were needed to keep lower caste people enslaved. So these were a kind of things that were happening in society at the same time. So the Brahmins who were completely in power were slowly losing their power because of the changes that were being brought by the British, and they were not at all happy about that. And we can see a lot of problems arising from that, because they wanted to hold on. They somehow or the other wanted to hold on to their power, and other upper caste people were also trying to, some of them were trying to fill the vacant positions left by Brahmins, because they knew that the Brahmins would soon be displaced, because the Brahmins were not getting properly educated. Brahmins, as in the Brahmins of Kerala, the Nambudiris, were not getting the necessary education at that time, and rather they were being very strict about this. Is again, we are talking about the time when the novel is written, late colonial period, late 19th century Kerala, and it was around that time or later that many social and community reform movements started. So the Brahmins slowly realized that they also needed to reform their communities. But at the same time, even before the Brahmins realized that, the other upper castes, including or the other dominant caste, let's say, at that time, they were not necessarily considered upper caste. Like, for example, the Nair community were considered to be Shudras at that time, and the Brahmins really did not consider them, they really considered them to be lower caste as well, but they were able to become very dominant in society. And so that was also happening at this time. And the very first novel in Malayalam, Indulekha, which was published a few years before Saraswativijayam, in Indulekha in 1889, I think Indulekha was published by Chandu Menon. And there we can see in Indulekha, if you have read it, you would see a kind of awareness coming from the members of the Nair community that they have to reform their community and not become the subjects of Brahmins anymore. So the അന്ന് കാലത്ത് സൊസൈറ്റിയിൽ ഉണ്ടായിരുന്ന മരുമക്കത്തായം, സംബന്ധം, ഇതുപോലുള്ള സംഭവത്തിനൊക്കെ എതിരെയായിരുന്നു, ഇങ്ങനെയുള്ള ചില ആചാരങ്ങൾക്ക് എതിരെയായിരുന്നു നമ്മൾ ഇന്ദുലേഖയിലൊക്കെ കാണുന്ന പല സംഭവങ്ങളും. അതേ സമയത്ത് ഒരുപാട് സോഷ്യൽ ഓർ കമ്മ്യൂണിറ്റി റിഫോം മൂവ്മെന്റ്സ് നടക്കുന്നുണ്ടായിരുന്നു. അപ്പൊ ഇതൊക്കെ ഒരു ഭാഗത്ത് കൂടെ നടക്കുന്നുണ്ട്. മറ്റൊരു ഭാഗത്ത് ഇപ്പൊ, അതായത് അപ്പർ കാസ്റ്റ്, അല്ലെങ്കിൽ ഇന്ന് നമ്മൾ അപ്പർ കാസ്റ്റ് എന്ന് പറയുന്ന പല കാസ്റ്റുകളും ആ സമയത്ത് അവരുടെ സ്വന്തം കമ്മ്യൂണിറ്റിനകത്ത് റിഫോം മൂവ്മെന്റ്സ് നടക്കുന്നുണ്ടായിരുന്നു. പക്ഷെ അതിനോട് ആ കമ്മ്യൂണിറ്റിയിലെ തന്നെ കാരണവന്മാർ, അല്ലെങ്കിൽ ആ കമ്മ്യൂണിറ്റിയിലെ തന്നെ ഏറ്റവും elders ആയി നിൽക്കുന്ന ആൾക്കാർ, they were very much against those kind of reforms because they wanted to hold on to the old rules, customs and traditions. So that was happening. And the European colonialism, which was slowly bringing the erstwhile slaves and untouchables into a better position, that was also happening. അപ്പൊ ഇത് രണ്ടും ഒരേ സമയത്ത് നടന്നുകൊണ്ടിരിക്കുകയാണ്. ആൻഡ് ഓഫ് കോഴ്സ് അറ്റ് ദ സെയിം ടൈം ദേ വേർ ഓൾസോ ദ ലോക്കൽ Christian and Muslim communities who were mostly trading communities, agrarian and trading communities at that time, and they were also having their own attempts at social mobility. അപ്പൊ ഇതെല്ലാം ഇങ്ങനെയുള്ള ഒരു കോണ്ടെക്സ്റ്റിലാണ് നമ്മൾ പോത്തേരി കുഞ്ഞമ്പുവിന്റെ സരസ്വതി വിജയം എന്ന് പറയുന്ന നോവലിനെ സിറ്റുവേറ്റ് ചെയ്യേണ്ടത്. ഈ ഒരു കോണ്ടെക്സ്റ്റ് നമുക്ക് ആഫ്റ്റർ ഡിസ്കസിങ് ദ സമ്മറി ഓഫ് ദ നോവൽ, മേ ബി വി കൻ ഗോ ലിറ്റിൽ ഡീപ്പർ ഇൻ ടു ദിസ് കൈൻഡ് ഓഫ് സോഷ്യൽ context, but for now ഒരു general picture I hope is clear. As far as Kunyambu is concerned, I had given you guys a YouTube video, ഒരു കണ്ണാടി എന്ന് പറഞ്ഞ പ്രോഗ്രാമിന്റെ ഒരു വീഡിയോ തന്നിട്ടുണ്ടായിരുന്നു. Hopefully you have watched it last week. It was a very short video about the legacy of this person, Potheri Kunyambu. And the important thing we should keep in mind is that Potheri Kunyambu came from the Tiya community of Malabar, which was considered to be a backward caste community. And at that time, education was denied to such communities because in the traditional manner. But he was a self-taught man. He taught himself everything from the scriptures to all kinds of to modern education. He taught himself everything, and he went on to become, first of all, he became a government official. He was a vakil is the term. He went on to become a lawyer or basically a government official. And he also became a writer, a famous writer. Now we know Potheri Kunyambu's Saraswativijayam is one of the is considered one of the early Malayalam novels. So he was a writer, even though at that time his writings were not accepted by everyone. For a long time, his writings were not accepted. It's only much later that the same kind of reverence that is given to Indulekha is now given to Saraswativijayam also. And he became not just a writer but also an educator, because he set up, he actually, even though he was from a backward caste community, he was from a family that had quite a bit of money. So he was able to set up a lot of schools, and he did this for the Pulaya community of Malabar. The Pulaya community was considered to be a lower caste community, and nowadays what we consider to be part of the scheduled caste. മലബാറിലെ പുലയ സമുദായത്തിലെ കുട്ടികൾക്ക് തീരെ സ്റ്റഡീസിനൊന്നും ഓപ്പർച്യൂണിറ്റീസ് ഉണ്ടായിരുന്നില്ല അന്ന് കാലത്ത്. അതുകൊണ്ട് ആ കുട്ടികൾക്ക് വേണ്ടി, അതായത് തൻ്റെ സ്വന്തം സമുദായത്തിലെ തീയ സമുദായത്തിലെ കുട്ടികൾക്ക് വേണ്ടി മാത്രം, അങ്ങനെയല്ല, ആ പുലയ സമുദായത്തിലെ കുട്ടികൾക്കാണ് ഏറ്റവും കൂടുതൽ ഇതിന് ബുദ്ധിമുട്ടെന്ന് മനസ്സിലാക്കിയിട്ട് ആ കുട്ടികൾക്ക് വേണ്ടിയിട്ട്, ആ സമുദായത്തിലെ കുട്ടികൾക്ക് വേണ്ടിയിട്ടാണ് കുഞ്ഞമ്പു സ്കൂളൊക്കെ ഒരുപാട് തുടങ്ങിയിരുന്നത്. അതുപോലെ എന്താ പറയുക, ഓൾ ദീസ് കൈൻഡ് ഓഫ് he conducted these events where people from different communities would sit and eat together, which was considered to be a very it was not allowed in those days for people from different castes and communities to sit and eat together, but he promoted all these things. So he was actually one of the early anti-caste writers and educators in late colonial Kerala. അപ്പോൾ അങ്ങനെയുള്ള പോത്തേരി കുഞ്ഞമ്പു എഴുതിയ ഒരു ബുക്കാണിത്. It was published first in 1892, and the title of the novel is Saraswativijayam. So it is, if you take, and also the epigraph of the novel starts with a little epigraph which basically says that education is the greatest of all wealth. Education is the greatest of all wealth. എല്ലാ എന്താ പറയുക, എന്തൊക്കെ തരം ഇതുണ്ടെങ്കിലും, എന്താ പറയുക, വെൽത്ത് ഉണ്ടെങ്കിലും വിദ്യാധനം സർവധനാൽ പ്രധാനം എന്ന് പറയുമല്ലോ, അതാണ് ബേസിക്കലി സംഭവം. എഡ്യൂക്കേഷൻ ഇസ് ദ ഗ്രേറ്റസ്റ്റ് ഓഫ് ഓൾ വെൽത്ത്. സോ ഫ്രം ദാറ്റ് ആൻഡ് ദ ടൈറ്റിൽ what we understand is that the Saraswati that the title is talking about is the Hindu goddess of learning. Saraswati is considered in Hindu mythology to be the goddess of learning. So Saraswati here refers to education mostly, and so it is about emancipation through education, or vijayam, or success through education. So having Saraswati, having education, Saraswativijayam can also mean, having a command over education will lead to emancipation. So that is the main idea behind the novel. Okay, so the victory of education or victory through education, we can see it in different ways. Okay, so now we will quickly move into the summary of the novel. So far, parnadu clear aano? Any doubts?
Clear, ma'am.
Okay, fine. So this novel is divided into 8 chapters, and it is, the novel is it's a literary form that was imported from the West. It was not a typically Indian form, and in the 19th century, that was when many people had started writing novels, especially in the late 19th century, and therefore the Indian novels tended to have a mix of different genres, so to speak. It was not like a typical novel that we know now. Ippa kanna modern novels pole ayirunilla. Korchugudi there were many comments by the author. There used to be many other discussions and things that were brought in. So it wouldn't be just a typical സ്റ്റോറി ബീങ് ടോൾഡ്. ഒരു പ്ലോട്ട് മാത്രമല്ല, അതിനെ ഓരോ കാര്യങ്ങളെ പറ്റി ഓഥറിന് പറയാനുള്ള ചില കാര്യങ്ങൾ ഉണ്ടാവും. അതൊക്കെ നമുക്ക് ഇതിലും ഈ നോവലിലും കാണാൻ പറ്റും. ദർ വുഡ് ബി സർട്ടൻ ഇന്ററപ്ഷൻസ് ആൻഡ് സംടൈംസ് ഇറ്റ് ഇസ് നോട്ട് പ്രോപ്പർലി ലീനിയർ ആയിട്ട് ആവണമെന്നില്ല കഥ വരുന്നത്. അപ്പൊ അങ്ങനെയുള്ള ചില എലിമെന്റ്സ് കാണാം. ബട്ട് അൺലൈക്ക് മെനി അതർ ഏർലി നോവൽസ്, ദിസ് ഇസ് നോട്ട് എ വെരി അൺവിൽഡി നോവൽ. ഇറ്റ്സ് ആക്ച്വലി ക്വൈറ്റ് എ ഷോർട്ട് നോവൽ ആൻഡ് ഇറ്റ് ഇസ് വെരി സിമ്പിൾ നോവൽ, വെരി ഈസി ടു റീഡ്, വെരി ആക്സസിബിൾ ആയിട്ടുള്ള ഒരു നോവലാണ്. And so as I mentioned, there are 8 chapters in the novel, and in each chapter, in the beginning and end of that chapter, there will be a quote from some scriptures, either Krishna Charitam, Manipravalam, or Tunjat Eഴുത്തച്ഛൻ's Ramayanam or Mahabharatam. So like that, Kunyambu has drawn upon certain classical Malayalam texts, which are not exactly scriptures, but which are basically literary texts that are based on religious stories. So there are certain things that he has taken from those, and he has used those to kind of bookend each chapter. ഇപ്പോൾ ഓരോ ചാപ്റ്ററിന്റെ തുടക്കത്തിലും അവസാനത്തിലും വെച്ചിട്ട് ആ ചാപ്റ്ററിനെ പ്രസന്റ് ചെയ്യുന്നത് ഇറ്റ് ഇസ് ത്രൂ ദീസ് ലൈൻസ്. ചില നോട്ട് എക്സാക്ട്ലി ശ്ലോകാസ് ബട്ട് റാദർ സർട്ടൻ ലൈൻസ്, ചില കവിതയുടെ വരികൾ വെച്ചിട്ടാണ് ഓരോ chapter തുടങ്ങുന്നതും അവസാനിക്കുന്നതും. And what we should keep in mind also as we go through the novel is that the main character of this novel, or rather one of the main characters of this novel, is an old Brahmin man named Kuberan Nambudiri. Kuberan Nambudiri is he is a rather middle-aged man. And the novel begins with him, his daughter and his grandchildren, as well as their servants, going to a particular place. So they are traveling to a particular place. Adu vechitana ee novel thodangunnathu. And basically the story is like this. Njan vera oru idine pattiyittulla oru cheriya another small clip I had given you last week, in which you would have got the basic summary, which is that it is about how this particular Nambudiri character comes up when they are traveling. He comes across a man who is singing, and the person he realizes that the person who is singing is a lower caste Pulaya man, and he gets very angry. He thinks that it is his ears will get polluted if he listens to the song by a lower caste, by an untouchable man. And he tells his servant, or rather he tells his somebody who's with him, one man named Ramankutti Nambiar. He tells him to go and find out who is singing. And when Ramankutti Nambiar finds out that it is a Pulayan, he hits him, and the man falls unconscious into the water. And then later we get the sense that later the dead body is found from the river of this Pulaya man, actually a young boy. He's only 16 years old, and suddenly the Nambudiri gets embroiled in a case. And the novel is about how the Nambudiri on the one hand tries to escape from his fate, but at the same time we realize by the end of the novel that the corpse is not that of the Pulaya man who was singing and who was hit by Ramankutti Nambiar, but rather somebody, that it was some other corpse, and this man had actually escaped. And with the help of education, with the help of European missionaries, he had got educated, and later towards the end of the novel he comes in the form of a judge who will be able to place a sentence, or rather who will be able to judge the fate of this Nambudiri later. So that is the basic story. Now we will go into it in a bit more detail. So this Kuberan Nambudiri and his wife, so his wife was not going anywhere. His wife Sri Devi was always staying in the house. He had a daughter named Subhadra, who was married to another Nambudiri called Yajnan Nambudiri. Yajnan Nambudiri was the son-in-law. And so the Kubera Nambudiri, his daughter, his grandchildren, Saraswati, Suvarnini, and Hari Jayantan. They were the 3 grandchildren. All these people were traveling, and with them was traveling this Ramankutti Nambiar and some other servants. So Ramankutti Nambiar is like a Karyasthan kind of person who will look after all the affairs of the Nambudiri. And when they go to other places, if the Nambudiri has to encounter people from some other community, the Nambudiri will not speak to them directly. The Nambudiri will ask, this Ramankutti Nambiar will mediate between these two people, because it was considered to be wrong at that time for the Nambudiri to interact directly with other community, with people from other communities. So all this was happening and they were going, and then they hear a song which is so beautiful. That is how initially the Nambudiri thinks about that song. So they were resting on their way and they hear a song from a field which was so beautiful that the Nambudiri thought a Gandharva had come to sing. Gandharva is a kind of celestial singer. So ഏതോ ഗന്ധർവൻ ഇറങ്ങി വന്ന് പാടുകയാണെന്ന് ഇയാൾ തോന്നിയിട്ട് he sends Ramankutti Nambiar to find out who is singing. And when Ramankutti Nambiar goes there, he sees that it is a Pulaya man named Maradan who was singing. And then he asks him, why are you singing? How dare you sing? And before the Pulaya boy can answer, he hits him and the boy falls unconscious into the water. And Ramankutti Nambiar comes back. And the Nambudiri asks him, so did you find who was singing this beautiful song? And Nambiar says, I did, and it was a Pulaya, and I punished him. So the Nambudiri gets even more agitated. He says, oh my God, so I was listening to a song by a Pulaya man. I didn't know this. This is very bad and all that. He gets very angry. And he says, did you kill him? And Ramankutti Nambiar says, yes, I hit him so hard that he will not survive. So neither of them stuck around to find out whether the boy was actually dead or not. But they just assumed that the boy would have died. So immediately they left. And then the Nambudiri said, this is not enough. It is not enough of a punishment to kill him. What we should do is we should find his entire family and uproot them from this land. So he calls the family of Maradan and his mother and some other very younger siblings come, and they have nothing. The father had died earlier, and this boy was the only earning member of the family. They were in deep poverty and they had nothing to do, and they were already crying because they couldn't find this boy anymore. But the Nambudiri calls him and says, he finds out that they are actually staying on his land. So they are his Kudiyanmarayittu താമസിക്കുന്ന ആൾക്കാരാണ്, and therefore he thought that he had the right to evict them from his land. So they said, you have to leave and go away, and you can go to some other land if you have. Basically, they had relatives in some other land, so they had to go there. But the Nambudiri was not bothered about them. So he did not think about the fact that they had been working hard for him for all these years, but rather he immediately told them to leave. So not only did he cruelly condone the killing of this boy, he did not directly kill him. It was Ramankutti Nambiar who killed him. But we realized that the Nambudiri was, Kubera Nambudiri was very happy with how Ramankutti Nambiar had done these things. And so he evicted the entire family, entire Pulaya family. And also then another man came to meet him, and this is a Tamil Brahmin called Kuppan Pattar. Kuppan Pattar. That is what the Nambudiri calls him. And this is a Tamil Brahmin who usually comes to sell cloth. So he comes to the Nambudiri to sell very expensive mundu. And this was a time when the Nambudiri felt that Ramankutti Nambiar had done him a great service by killing the Pulaya boy. So he tells Kuppan Pattar to give him 2 sets of mundu. To give 2 sets of mundu to Ramankutti Nambiar. So these are expensive cloths. And then Kuppan Pattar is also very clever. So he realized that he should take this opportunity to make sure that he gets as much business as possible. So he tells the Nambudiri, this is a great service that Ramankutti Nambiar has rendered to you. Actually, it is such a bad thing if the lower caste people start singing, and he did so much for you. So just 2 sets of mundu are not enough. You should give him something more. And then the Nambudiri said, okay, then give him that entire set of mund. So ഇയാൾ ഒരു ഭാണ്ഡത്തിൽ കുറെ മുണ്ടൊക്കെ ആയിട്ടാണ് വന്നിരിക്കുന്നത്. അത് മുഴുവൻ രാമൻകുട്ടി നമ്പ്യാർക്ക് കൊടുത്തോളൂ എന്ന് പറഞ്ഞിട്ട് അതിനുള്ള പൈസ നമ്പൂതിരി കൊടുക്കും. So we can also see that the Nambudiri, even though because he's not educated and he's only educated in the Vedas, okay, and the scriptures and the Manusmriti, and he keeps quoting from them, and that is why he says that all these things should not happen. But the other people around him are much more clever, and they are able to exploit him. That is also something that we see slowly. So he is also exploiting the lower caste people, but at the same time he doesn't realize that he is being manipulated, or he is being cheated a little bit by other people like Ramankutti Nambiar or like Kuppan Pattar. Okay, so that happens. And however, after some time, an investigation is begun into the death of this Pulaya boy, because a person, another person called Kutti Hassan Mapla. Kutti Hassan Mapla is a Muslim, Mapla, a person from the Mapla community, and he says that he was going through the fields when he saw a dead body, and it looked like the body of a 16-year-old boy. And because the body had been in the water for a long time, it was difficult to find out whose body it was. So, but he knew that some incident like this had happened, that Kubera Nambudiri and his minion Ramankutti Nambiar had gone through this area, and there was an altercation that they had with this Pulaya boy who was singing. They had hit the boy, and they had also evicted the boy's family. Idu muzhuvan iyalku ariyarunnu. And Kutti Hassan Mapla also had some other problems with the നമ്പൂതിരിയുമായിട്ട് മുന്നേ അയാൾക്ക് എന്തൊക്കെയോ ചില അഭിപ്രായ വ്യത്യാസങ്ങളും തർക്കങ്ങളൊക്കെ ഉണ്ടായിരുന്നു. Because of that, he thought that he should complain against this Nambudiri. So he went to the police and he lodged a formal complaint saying that this is what happened, and this should be the dead body of this Pulaya boy. And as far as he knows, and he gathers a lot of witnesses from that area who could also give credence to the idea that it was Kubera Nambudiri and Ramankutti Nambiar who were responsible for this death. Now, when the Nambudiri comes to know about this case, he realizes that the Adhikari is the government official who is like a magistrate or something of that area. So he's like a local self-governing person. So the Adhikari of that area is a man named Kothu Nambiar. And this person had a daughter who was in a sambandham with Kubera Nambudiri's younger brother Hari Jayantan. So Kubera Nambudiri had a younger brother named Hari Jayantan, and Hari, if you have watched movies from that time or read books of that time, you would know that in pre-colonial, in pre-independence Kerala, actually there was this rule among the Nambudiri community that only the eldest male member will inherit the property, and because of that only the eldest son in a family can marry another Nambudiri woman. So only their lineage would be considered to be a proper lineage. The younger sons of the family should marry women from other communities, and those were not considered to be proper marriages. The children of those unions were not given any inheritance, or they were not even considered to be part of the Nambudiri family. And the eldest son can marry more than once. He can marry several women. That is also, if you have seen this movie called Parinayam, for example, 1990s ഇറങ്ങിയ ഒരു സിനിമയാണ്. MT വാസുദേവൻ നായർ സ്ക്രിപ്റ്റ് ഒക്കെ എഴുതിയ ഫിലിമാണ് പരിണയം എന്ന് പറഞ്ഞിട്ട്. If you see that film, you will see something like this, where there is a old Nambudiri man who gets married to a young girl, and then he dies, and then it is about the Saraswativijayam that happens and all that. We'll come into the question of Saraswativijayam later, because that also happens in the story. But anyway, Hari Jayantan, the younger brother of Kubera Nambudiri, he wanted to get married to people, to somebody, and he had been telling his elder brother that I want to get married, but Kubera Nambudiri had not been giving it much importance. He said every time Hari Jayantan came with some alliance proposal, he would say, oh, no, their family is not good enough for us. അങ്ങനെ പറഞ്ഞ് പല പ്രൊപ്പോസൽസും പോയി. അങ്ങനെ Harijayanthanu Sanam, he himself got into an alliance, a sambandham with, and sambandham, as you know, was it was not like a legalized marriage. It was a kind of how do I say, kind of informal arrangement between a man and a woman. And so in the case of sambandham, the woman stays with her own family and the man has to go and visit in that house. അങ്ങനെയൊക്കെ ഉള്ളതാണ്. അപ്പോൾ സമ്പന്ധം ആയിട്ട് ഇയാൾ എസ്റ്റാബ്ലിഷ് ചെയ്തു ഹരിജയന്തൻ with a girl who was the daughter of this adhikari. So for 1 year, more than 1 year, they had been continuing this sambandham, but it was never completely legalized into a proper marriage. And the adhikari was hoping that it will become a proper marriage. Adu proper aayittu ivare ഈ നമ്പൂതിരി സമ്മതിച്ച് ഒരു പ്രോപ്പർ മാരേജ് ആവുമെന്ന് അയാൾ പ്രതീക്ഷിച്ചിരിക്കുകയായിരുന്നു. ബട്ട് സോ ഫാർ ഹി ഹാഡ് നോട്ട് ഡൺ എനിത്തിങ് ഫോർ ദാറ്റ്, ബിക്കോസ് ദ നമ്പൂതിരി ഹാഡ് ലുക്ക് ഡൗൺ ഓൺ this adhikari and his family. But now he realized that adhikari is going to be in charge of this, investigating this case. So he went to that adhikari and he pretended that he is going there to arrange the sambandham. And then they arranged the sambandham and they had a feast and they sat together and talked together for a long time. And finally the Kubera Nambudiri managed to convince the adhikari to write the report in a way that will not implicate Kubera Nambudiri or Ramankutti Nambyar. So അങ്ങനെ ആ കേസ് ഒഴിവാക്കാൻ അയാൾ ശ്രമിച്ചു. But what happened was that this Kutti Hassan Mapla knew that this was happening and he was not at all happy with it. So he wanted to, he realized that the Nambudiri is playing some tricks in order to get himself acquitted. So he decided to file a case again. He decided to put more pressure on the case. So he went to 2 or 3 people. One of those was another Nambudiri named Bhavasharman Nambudiri. And this Bhavasharman Nambudiri was a rival of our Kubera Nambudiri. So, Kubera Nambudiri in the under the custody of Kubera Nambudiri, there were many temples. And because he was a priest, because he was a Brahmin, he had complete control over these temples and the kind of festivals that were happening there. And people would come there and give offerings to the temple. All of them he would take. So like that, Bhavasharma Nambudiri wanted custody of some particular temple, but because there was a lot of court cases and fights and all, but still he was unable to get it. So he had some anger against, he had a resentment against Kubera Nambudiri. So when Kutti Hassan approached him, he said, okay, I will take this opportunity to teach Kubera Nambudiri a lesson. Another character, another person whom Kutti Hassan approached was a European planter named Joseph. And this European planter was the employee of this boy who had died, that is Maradan, the Pulaya boy who died. And he had actually been very fond of this boy. So even though he was a European, and therefore, first of all, he did not believe in any of these caste systems that they were doing, what he noticed was that this boy was very enthusiastic, he was very energetic, and he worked very hard. These are the kind of values that the European planter gave emphasis to, gave importance to. So he was very fond of this boy, and he was very upset when the boy disappeared. And when Kutti Hassan went and told him that this is what happened, that this boy was killed, and these are the circumstances that led to the killing, the European planter also wanted to bring the perpetrators to justice. So he also put pressure on the police, and finally the pressure on the police put by Bhavasharman Nambudiri and the European planter, and he also influenced a lot of other Europeans to put pressure on the police, that was greater than the pressure that the Nambudiri could put on the adhikari. And therefore the police decided to take the case forward. Now, luckily for the Nambudiri, he was traveling at that time he was traveling to Kozhikode. So this was, all the story is happening in Talasheri, as I said. He was traveling to Kozhikode and he had taken with him this Kuppan Pattar. Usually there was another person who used to do everything for him, another Tamil Brahmin by the name of Parameshwaran Pattar. Parameshwaran Pattar. But somehow, after all these incidents, the Nambudiri became closer to this Kuppan Pattar. And Kuppan Pattar was a very clever person. He also knew how to make the Nambudiri do things according to his ideas. So instead of calling Parameshwaran Pattar, എന്നും അയാളുടെ കൂടെ പോകാറുള്ളത് പരമേശ്വരൻ പട്ടരാണ്. പക്ഷെ അയാളെ വിളിക്കുന്നതിന് പകരം കുപ്പൻ പട്ടരെ കൊണ്ടുപോയി. അപ്പോൾ പരമേശ്വരൻ പട്ടർ was also very angry with the Nambudiri, and he felt very humiliated because he was suddenly cast away from his job. So he was also upset about that. So he also thought he will take some revenge on the Nambudiri. That was happening on the one side. We'll come back to Parameshwaran Pattar in a moment. So the Nambudiri and Kuppan Pattar had gone. They were called by a government official in order to give evidence about, or rather give their testimony about a case that was going on, which was about who should have control over these temples. ഇത്രയും കാലം ഈ നമ്പൂതിരിമാരുടെ കയ്യിലായിരുന്നു ടെമ്പിൾ മാനേജ് ചെയ്യാനുള്ള അധികാരം. അപ്പോൾ ഗവൺമെന്റ് സേയിങ് ദാറ്റ് നൗ ഇറ്റ് ഷുഡ് പാസ് ടു ദ ഗവൺമെന്റ്. ഗവൺമെന്റ് ഷുഡ് സെറ്റ് അപ്പ് ലൈക്ക് വി ഹാവ് നൗ, there were some boards and all that, and government should be in charge of these temples, and the income that is generated by the temples through offerings by the devotees or any other means, that income, a part of that income should also be used to educate the people or for the welfare of the people. But the Nambudiri who was now handling the temples, he was taking all that income for himself. He was not spending any of it for the people. So there is a long conversation between the Nambudiri and the government official, which we can see long detailed conversation under, where each time the official asks him, so don't you think that some part of the temple property also belongs to the public? And then he says, no, it doesn't belong to the public, it belongs to us. So the government official asks, but how do you know it belongs to you? In what evidence do you have? What proof do you have that it belongs to you? And the Nambudiri says, but the proof is there in our scriptures, and he recites some shlokas from Manusmriti and other Vedas and other things. So basically, he goes on and on like that. And then the government official asks him a question which is very interesting for that particular political context. The official asks, see, nowadays a lot of lower caste people are converting to Christianity so that they can get education. Now, if you were to use some part of this income to provide education for lower caste Hindus, don't you think they will stay within Hinduism instead of converting to Christianity? But from the Nambudiri's answer, we see that Nambudiri is not at all interested. He says that if the lower caste people convert to Christianity, it is probably because of some sin that they have committed in their previous life. He doesn't see the historical reasons or the political reasons or the economic reasons why conversion happens. So he doesn't realize that it is probably, it can be the government official is trying to say that maybe it is a fault from the side of the upper caste Hindus, that they cannot keep these people happy and keep them as part of the Hindu fold. The lower caste people, if you oppress them so much, then why would they want to be part of your community? Rather, you should give them a bit more freedom. You should give them a bit more you should give them more education. You should use some of this income for their welfare as well. He's trying to say all those things, but the Nambudiri is extremely short-sighted. He doesn't see the point of any of those questions, and he just keeps on saying that all this belongs to me. I am not going to give it up, and the Manusmriti is what allows me to hold on to all these things. So he goes on and on like that, and finally the discussion is over, and he's returning home. And he is very happy. He thinks that I have given all the right answers, and now the government can't do anything about the temples. They will have to give the temples back to me. എന്നൊക്കെ വിചാരിച്ചിട്ടാണ് ഇയാൾ പോകുന്നത്. അങ്ങനെ തിരിച്ചു വരുന്ന സമയത്ത്, as he is about to return, so he has gone to Kozhikode and he's staying in some matham. They can't go and stay in hotels and all, right? So he's staying in some matham, and letter comes to him from his own land, and he realizes this is a letter from the police. So this is actually a kind of court order saying, or rather, it's saying that Ramankutty Nambiar, who had not approached Nambudiri to Kozhikode but stayed in Talasheri, Ramankutty Nambiar has been now arrested for the murder of that Pulaya boy, and the next arrest will be of Kubera Nambudiri. Sorry, it is not a court order, it is a letter that comes to him from his son-in-law. Which says that this is happening. Now, at the same time, another horrible thing that happened in the Nambudiri's household was that his daughter, Subhadra, was accused of being an immoral woman. And for this also, the Nambudiri's enemies were responsible. So, according to the novelist, Subhadra was actually a very good woman. She was a very moral woman. She was very devoted to her husband, Yajnan Nambudiri, and to her children. But the problem was that she had a maid named Kumba, Kumba, who was not a very good woman. Maybe the novelist doesn't mention exactly what Kumba did, but that she lived a rather immoral life. So Subhadra was a very patient person, and initially she tried to make allowances for the maid, but when the complaints about her maid started getting more and more and she could not neglect it anymore, finally she dismissed the maid. So this maid also became very angry at Subhadra, and the maid happened to meet Parameshwaran Pattar, who was also angry at being dismissed from service by the Nambudiri. Now, both of them were unmarried, so they started getting together. So they formed a relationship and they started spreading rumors about Subhadra that she is actually the immoral woman. Angane Subhadra oru immoral സ്ത്രീയാണ്, മറ്റ് പരപുരുഷന്മാരുമായി ബന്ധമുള്ള സ്ത്രീയാണെന്നൊക്കെ പറഞ്ഞിട്ട് ഇവര് പറഞ്ഞ് ഇറക്കാൻ തുടങ്ങി. And when such rumors became too much, the other Nambudiris like Baba Sharma Nambudiri and other people who had their own problems with Kubera Nambudiri, they all got together and they said that we should actually have a Smartha Vijaram for Subhadra. And Smartha Vijaram basically means that when a woman from a Nambudiri community in those days was accused of immoral behavior, she would be isolated and she would be questioned by a set of Nambudiris who will come, and she would be treated very badly, and she would be threatened and scared, and they will ask her lots of questions. You would have heard about this Kureyadata Tatri and all that real life incidents of Smartha Vijaram in Kerala. So like that, they try to do it with Subhadra as well, and there is a long description of that process as well, where the woman who is being treated to Smartha Vijaram, who is being subjected to Smartha Vijaram, will be called sadhana. Sadhana means thing. So she will be considered an object. She will not even be considered a human being. And there is no way to prove, there is no evidence that is being asked to see whether she is a good person or a bad person. The only way is to make her confess. So they will do anything to make her confess. And for a long time, they kept questioning Subhadra, but she did not say anything. Finally, one day they drugged her. They put some poison or a drug into her food. And that day, Subhadra's husband noticed that she was not behaving normally. She was behaving as if she was mentally problem behaving. And then he realized that they must have put some poison or something into her. It is not actually poison, it's a kind of drug that will alter her behavior. And under the influence of that drug, they made her confess that she was actually she had been in relationship with other men, that she had committed adultery. But this was all actually wrong. They forced her to make this kind of confession. And as soon as she made this confession, they cast her out of the community. They excommunicated her. അവർക്ക് ഭ്രഷ്ട് കൽപ്പിച്ചു എന്ന് മാത്രമല്ല, അവരെ നിർബന്ധിച്ച് സുഭദ്രയെ കൊണ്ട് പറയിപ്പിച്ചത് even before her marriage she had relations with other men എന്ന് പറയിപ്പിച്ചു. അതുകൊണ്ട് അവർ പറഞ്ഞു സുഭദ്ര മാത്രമല്ല, സുഭദ്രയുടെ കുട്ടികളും 3 കുട്ടികളുള്ളവരും അവരാരും ഈ ഫാമിലിയുടെ മെമ്പേഴ്സ് ആവാൻ യോഗ്യരല്ല, അവരാരും ബ്രാഹ്മണരാവാൻ യോഗ്യരല്ല, അവരെല്ലാവർക്കും ഒരുമിച്ച് ഭ്രഷ്ട് കൽപ്പിച്ചു. അങ്ങനെ സുഭദ്രയുടെ they have this Marakkuda and all that, all this Olakuda and all that, അതെല്ലാം പൊളിച്ച് she and her 3 children were set out, and nobody in the family was able to protest this. Even Subhadra's husband was unable to protest this. And all this was happening when Kubera Nambudiri was not around. Excuse me. Okay, so I think we will stop now, and we will continue in the next class.